to meeting number 57 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, pursuant to the Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, April 27, 2021. The committee is meeting to study Canada Revenue Agency's efforts to combat tax avoidance and evasion. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th of this year, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom applications. The proceedings will be made available by the House Commons website. For the information of committee, we, as you know, issued 4 summons. We do have one witness who came. I have some letters from legal counsel for the others. I'll deal with that in a minute. For the committee's information, Mr. Bilodeau, his counsel asked if she could be with him, and I authorized that. He will, though, be the one that has to speak. And on the motion passed the other day, we received responses from 3 individuals who have not appeared. The clerk sent those letters out, I believe, to committee members, and they were marked confidential. We do now have information that they do not need to remain confidential, and they can be made public. And I think the best way to start with that is I will read into the record each letter that we received from counsel for the various people we issued summonses to, and hopefully by that time Mr. Bibelow will be on. So the first letter is based on the summons that we sent to Michael Morris. It's directed to the clerk of the committee, re Canada Revenue Agency's efforts to combat tax avoidance and evasion. I have been retained, it's from the firm Stockwoods Barristers. I've been retained by Michael Morris in connection with the above noted study. I have an email from you dated June 15th, 2021 to Michael Morris's brother, Ian Morris, directing Ian Morris to forward Michael Morris's contact information to you and attaching a summons to Michael Morris calling for his appearance at the Standing Committee on Finance on June 17th, 2021 at 3:30 p.m. Michael Morris is not a resident of Canada and has not resided in Canada since 1999. At present, he is outside Canada. By responding to your email, I do not intend to attorn on his behalf to Parliament's jurisdiction. That said, my client is willing to respond to reasonable requests for information from the committee. Please forward in writing any requests the committee may make, and we will consider them. I look forward to hearing from you. Yours truly, Brian Glover, on behalf of Stockwoods LLP law firm. The second letter is from Kapoor Barristers. It is written to the clerk of the committee as well, and it's Finance Committee, Ms. Gibbons and Mr. Maycock. Quote, I have been retained by Ms. Susan Gibbons and Mr. William Maycock in connection with the above noted study. Both were provided with summons late in the day on June 15th, returnable this afternoon at 15:30 Eastern Time. Neither of my clients are residents in Canada. At present, both reside outside Canada. By this letter, in response to your email and the committee's summons, neither attorn to Parliament's jurisdiction. As I mentioned to you in our telephone call, neither of my clients will be attending this afternoon. That said, both of my clients are willing to respond to reasonable requests for information from the committee. To that end, we would be grateful if the committee can provide us with an indication of the nature of their inquiry. I should add that as far as we are aware, the committee's interest in our clients concerns matters in the distant past. So any direction the committee can give would greatly assist our clients. Please forward to me in writing any requests, questions the committee wishes, and we will consider them. I look forward to hearing from you. Yours truly, Anil K. Capper of Capper Barristers. So those are the letters that we've received. They are on the public record, and just ignore the confidential that was on it that went to committee members in the beginning. I'm not did Mr. Bilodeau get hooked up yet? No. So anybody got, while we're waiting, has anybody got any thoughts? We do have a steering committee later in the day as well that we can talk about these issues as well. Mr. Kelly.
If we have a moment before our witness is ready, then I will remind you, Mr. Chair, that I think you undertook at the last meeting that you would update us at the beginning of this meeting as to the status of the invitations to the two ministers that have been invited to appear on Tuesday.
Yeah, the Minister for Revenue Canada is available for an hour. The Minister of Finance is not.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
But on that second hour, do we want officials or what? The Minister of Finance, I understand, just can't come. But what do we want to do with the second hour?
Perhaps the Minister of Revenue would like to stay so that we could have a more fulsome discussion with her.
I don't think she can. I think she's granted an hour, so we can go to. We usually have a minister for an hour and then go to officials for an hour.
I would concur with Mr. Kelly, Mr. Chair. I think it would be worthwhile having the Revenue Minister, who hasn't appeared before this committee, to come for 2 hours with her officials. I think that's perfectly legitimate.
We did invite her for an hour and she accepted for an hour. I mean, I can request that, and that's not a problem. We can drop her a note. It's not till next Tuesday, right?
Mr. Chair,
so we can have the clerk drop her a note and see how she responds.
We could always build on the existing invitation. Did I not appear for 2 hours once at your trade committee, Wayne?
Oh, yeah, but we were just so nice to you, Ed, that you couldn't do anything else. I remember that.
Yeah, but I answered questions, as I recall.
And then what's the name's guy? I know him well. I can't think of it. That did all the negotiations. He did all the answers.
Oh, Steve Verhoel.
Steve Verhoel, yeah.
Yeah, he answered all the questions. Did a great job.
You're a great guy. You were fortunate to work with him.
Yep.
Is there Mr. Bilodeau? Can you hear me? You look froze there. I wonder, Mr. Clerk, I don't know if this committee would agree with this, but do we have to go to voice? What's the problem here, I wonder?
The problem was that the council wanted into the committee as well, and I sent her a guest account. And then Mr. Bilodeau initially was using that guest account, so that's what created the first problem. Now, Mr. Bilodeau is using his own account, and I don't understand why this is not working because he's not using the guest account. So I don't have any answers. I don't understand why this is not working. He was just here under his own credential. It was his name that was there, so I don't know.
Okay.
And I think it's important to note, Mr. Chair, we haven't had this problem with any other witness to this extent. Sometimes we have temporary problems, but this is quite rare.
Yeah, it is. In any event, we'll.
Because half the quarter of the meeting's already gone, right? So.
Yeah, but part of that was due to the vote. We're late getting started ourselves. We will not blame that on Mr. Bilodeau. Any thoughts on these letters? They're there for your information. In any event, I think we need to, in the steering committee, certainly. They do live out of the country. If we want to draft a series of questions that we want to respond to or whatever, that'll take some time for us to sit down and do, I would think. Sorry, I believe, was it you, Peter, that wanted in, and then Pat?
Monsieur Saint-Marie.
It was Mr. Saint-Marie. I would have liked to make a statement after reading the two letters, about 5 minutes. That could be taken from my time for the meeting, but before I could allow my colleagues, Collie and Julian, to speak, and then I would like to give my reaction for about 5 minutes to these two letters.
We're going to allow you time during the regular question rounds for that, so we can wiggle that in now, and maybe when Mr. Bilodeau comes back on, we'll see where we're at. So I'll go to you first, Pat Kelly, then Peter Julian, and then Gabriel.
I was only going to ask procedurally how written questions would be put to those witnesses.
I think procedurally, Mr. Kelly and I could be wrong on this too, but I think procedurally we would decide at an in-camera session what are the kind of questions that we want to send among ourselves, come to some kind of consensus of what they should be, and have the clerk send them to these individuals directly. That would be my thought. Clerk or anyone else might have other ideas, but that's how I think it would be done. Peter, Julian?
Hey, Monsieur Président, je crois que...
Chair, I think that Mr. Saint-Marie is going to propose a motion. It's not. That's not for sure. No, not for sure. Because otherwise, I might do so. But the idea it would be to once again ask the questions we asked last month, and I think it would be appropriate to ask these questions, and we come back to the. For the questions this summer, and we should have documents that will arrive in a few weeks. So there will be room for meeting this summer to follow up on all this information. And I think that Mr. Saint-Marie spoke to me about a motion asking KPMG to respond, and there were no answers to those questions at our first meeting, and I don't know if there will be answers today. It doesn't seem very positive, and we've always been 35 minutes here, so that's just what I wanted to say, and I think that it's important to make this request on the part of the committee.
Questions, if I could put it this way, normally I did say that maybe the committee could meet and there could be some consensus on questions, but actually at a committee meeting, members can ask what they like. They don't need consensus to ask questions. So we would maybe have to go to members and have them put questions and feed them in and send them out that way through the analysts, and the clerk might be better. All right, Gabriel, I know you want to, I still don't see Mr. Bilodeau. No, that's Peter coming up. So if you want to go to your statement and we'll do that, and if he comes in, we will hold him because we want to give you the 5. I think you wanted 5 minutes.
Yes, but beforehand, if I may, I would be ready to make a motion, the motion that Mr. Julian was referring to. If the clerk can confirm that he's received it by email, the motion that could be distributed to colleagues, so you should have that version in both languages very soon. And in the meantime, I will read it. And as you know, Mr. Julian, my colleague, when the representative from KPMG appeared, I asked some questions, and then the clerk sent the questions in writing, and we have received 2 letters from the lawyer representing KPMG who raised some points but didn't really answer the questions. So I would suggest that the committee ask a motion that these questions should be sent back to KPMG with a letter from the House concerning the rights and privileges of committees. So it reads as follows. The Committee of Finance asked the following questions of KPMG and expects a response by 1 August. KPMG just must send a non-redacted version of questions to the House for confirmation. KPMG has certain financial structures that will allow their clients to avoid taxes and has created or contributed to creating, directly or indirectly, 1 or more businesses, allowing some Canadian taxpayers to hide funds or avoid taxes. Please furnish to the committee all information relating to these clients and the businesses, the list of administrators, the description of the strategies, the planning, the number of people who benefited from these structures, the fees received by KPMG for these procedures. Please confirm this information for all such structures that have been used, and please indicate which jurisdiction these are located in. Please provide information on these files from Canada Revenue, the taxes imposed and the individuals involved, and KPMG, any other business should provide information on the 4 companies, Isle of Man, how was it involved, if so, and please allow KPMG to provide information on any information they've gathered amongst their employees, and did KPMG contribute to directly or indirectly the creation or use of these 4 businesses, and we ask KPMG to ensure that they have interviewed their own staff that might have information in this regard, and do not limit these efforts to the last 10 years. So there's the motion, and if the committee adopts it, I would suggest that these questions be sent to KPMG along with a letter provided by the law clerks of the House.
Okay, we are discussing. It is in order because it is in the business that we're dealing with. Do all members have a copy of that a motion? I didn't get it all read myself yet, but in any event, go ahead, Mr. Julian. I think I've seen your hand.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I don't really think we need to spend a lot of time talking about this. This is the kind of questions that we have been asking from the beginning. KPMG has indicated that they are willing to answer questions. They have yet to actually answer the questions, though. And I do think we have a responsibility as a committee to actually lay that out in written form as they have sometimes requested so that we get the answers. I like the timeline as well in Mr. Saint-Marie's motion for August 1st. We will be getting other information over the course of the summer, and I think this will be important and germane to our work. So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this. I'd certainly be, I think, very willing that we move to adopt the motion.
All right. It's open for further discussion or questions to Gabriel on it. Does anybody have anything they want to raise? People, it would be better if we had a little longer to see it beforehand, Gabriel, but it is what it is. Mr. Fraser.
Mr. Chair, just as we did in the last day, I don't think we need to have an extensive debate or a formal vote. I expect, unless a member thinks differently than me on this committee, that it'll likely pass without further debate.
Okay, are we all in agreement that the letters be sent on behalf of committee?
I had one more question.
Well, okay,
Sorry.
one more question. Who's that?
I forget how to get. It's Tamara.
Yeah, and I can't see you when you're hiding in that room. Tamara, go ahead, Ms. Jansen. The floor is yours.
I can't wait till you can come and join us.
Me too.
So I was just wondering, number 3, it almost sounds like you want to have all the files that KPMG has on every Canadian client. So I just wanted to confirm it's in regards to the beginning of the motion. I think it's number 3 where it says that.
Oui, bien, très bonne question. Ce point-ci est...
Excellent. This point is found within the request. So if here we're talking here about the tax schemes created by KPMG for Canadian clients that used shell companies and had discussions with CRA, as Mr. Laveau mentioned last Tuesday. So there was a question of 16, and so they were talking about 16 to 20. So I think this is the scope. It's not a fishing expedition for all clients. It's really in a link to this study. And so I hope that clarifies. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Ed. I'm just wondering if 3 should be clarified a little bit as well. Go ahead, Ed. I hear you, but I don't see you. There you go.
Agreed. It should be clarified. In fact, the English version, the translation is, I think, to put it mildly, somewhat awkwardly worded. And could I ask that it be retranslated just for those of us who only understand English? Because I think there are elements of the motion that actually say something a little bit different than what it actually says in English. So, Mr. Clerk, are you able to arrange for it to be properly translated into English?
I don't know. I'll answer.
I'm not sure. Here's what it reads in English, Gabriel. Please, and if you looked at this on its own without the rest, please provide for each KMPG Canada clients the conclusions of each file with CRA, including taxes reimbursed, incurred interest, and penalties for each taxpayer. If you just pulled that out on its own, you'd think you were looking at the whole clientele of KPMG. So
exactly,
there needs to be a little work done on that.
Yeah, and the other sections of the resolution are a little problematical as well, or some of them. So just a proper translation of it would be very helpful to all of us.
I think we all agree to the intent, and maybe we just need to clean up the language. And maybe, Mr. Clerk, we can run this by the experts in translation, see what they can do without having to come back to committee with it. Peter Julian.
Just wanted to add one quick point. I noticed in a quick reading, I forgot to ensure that Parisia Et dans la motion aussi, on a 4.
In point 4 of the motion, Parisia, I think that there needs to be a friendly amendment for Mr. Sainte-Marie. We should add Parisia there. If we talk about all these companies, we should add Parisia, I believe, to the list. And I completely agree with, as Mr. Fast was mentioning, the English version needs to be revised and cleaned up.
Okay, can we'd authorize myself and maybe the clerk to clean that up? And are we in agreement with Parisia going in there as well? No, do I see any problems? None? Okay. All right, then we will do that and get that out this week. How are we doing with our witness, Mr. Clerk?
We're with his technician on the phone. We're still having issues. I don't have any updates aside from the fact that they're working together, our technicians and his technician.
Okay. Where is Mr. Bilodeau? Where is he operating from?
He's in Montreal.
Montreal. Oh, Annie.
We're celebrating the Habs win. What can I say? Come on. So we're a little hungover, you know.
Yeah, that shouldn't affect the technology.
Technology is great when it works.
That's true. That's true.
If I may, we agreed to add Parisia in point 3. Is that right?
No, we agreed to add Parisia in point 4. And we need to clean up point 3 so that it is clear that we were looking at these clients involved that are kind of outlined in point 1, I believe it was.
Oui, et en plus faire une révision linguistique de la version anglaise.
And to review the English version, if I understood what Mr. Fast was saying.
Yeah. Okay, no wonder I'm having a hard job to hear. Didn't have my volume turned up. Okay, should we suspend for 10 minutes and come back, see where we're at?
Sinon, moi, je suis prêt à faire ma déclaration concernant.
If not, I can make my statement now with regards to the letters that you read.
In terms of the meeting, Gabriel. Go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would have important questions for the witness, and I hope that he will be able to connect and that this is not some sort of strategy. But I'm going to make this following statement. We know with regards to the use of fiscal paradises to hide money or to not pay tax, this is extremely concerning. People and firms that do this do not have are not fulfilling their obligations with regards to society. This has to change. The committee, the interpreter doesn't have this copy. I will do my best. We're talking here about the
could I get you to start over, slow down? The interpreter doesn't have a copy, and she's finding it a little difficult. So just go a little slower, and you've got the time.
OK, merci. Donc, je reprends. La question de lutte.
Thank you. The question of the use of fiscal paradises to hide money or to not pay tax is extremely concerning. People and firms using this are not fulfilling their obligations with regards to society. Their attitude seems to demonstrate very little care with regards to CRA, the government, and the Parliament of Canada. This needs to change. The committee has spent many hours studying this issue, and more particularly with regards to the KPMG schemes, and that with regards to stealing the savings of thousands in the Weinbergs, North Shield, and Montreal frauds. 4 shell companies, also Shashqua, Qatar, Siax, and Spatha, registered in the Isle of Man, would have been used as well. Troubling information seems to join these 4 companies to KPMG, even if they say the opposite. The reason why we met today is to shed some light on these 4 shell companies by questioning the people that know the facts of the issue. Sandra Georgeson and Ann Cooper Woods were called to testify. Both were working for KPMG. They were part of the direction or the management of these 4 companies, and they know the facts. Mrs. Georgeson wrote the email saying that KPMG Canada collaborated in the implementation of these 4 companies. Mrs. Georgeson was invited to appear last May 6th. She refused by saying there was a scheduling conflict. She also declined today's invitation and all future testimony. Mrs. Cooper Woods did not accept to testify before the committee either. Because these ladies do not have Canadian citizenship, the committee cannot compel them to testify. We also invited Mr. Michael Morris. He's part of the direction of Sasquatch with Mrs. Woods and Mrs. Georgeson. Also, he helped Mr. Weinberg to transfer the stolen money outside of Canada. Mr. Morris is a Canadian citizen who is charged with the Barrington Bank. To obtain his coordinates, the committee contacted his brother, the Toronto lawyer, Mr. Yan Morris. We received a letter from his lawyer declining his participation in the committee, and this is unacceptable. We also invited and called to testify Mrs. Suzanne Gibbons, a Canadian citizen working in Bermuda. She was on the Qatar, Six and Spatha boards. We also asked her boss to testify. Mr. Mika studied in Halifax and Hamilton and is a member of the Canadian Tax Foundation. Both have lawyers' letters refusing to testify. This is unacceptable. I would like to say that these invitations to testify stipulated the possibility of using video conference to testify. Distance is not a reasonable motive for refusing. We have 5 key witnesses that know the facts of this case refusing to cooperate. 3 of them even refused, and they are Canadian citizens. This makes the work of the committee extremely difficult, and this constitutes contempt. We can't stop here. The minister has to call for a public inquiry on all of this. She has the authority. I sincerely hope that the work of the committee will contribute to building more fiscal justice in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. St. Marie, and we can take note of that. Whoops, where did Mr. Bilodeau go now? He was on there for the last minute. There he is.
He froze
Go
again,
ahead.
sir.
Oh, God.
It seems that when he logs on, five minutes after he logs on, or a couple minutes, he freezes and then he's disconnected.
Can you ask them, is there any way he could come on by voice?
I'll check with the technicians.
I mean, even if the video is not going to work, could he come on by voice? It's not ideal, but he would be a witness that we could hear by voice. I think if we're at least it gives us somewhere to go. There, I see him again now. Brian, do you ever have this trouble at your committee?
On occasion, honestly, we're very lucky to have the tech people that we do have.
Are we ever?
It's they work so hard to basically figure this all out from scratch. But yeah, there are occasions where it's just a bandwidth issue.
Yeah. Bandwidth in Montreal, everybody trying to cheer for Toronto.
Yeah, it could be.
And it's not uncommon for depending on security, firewalls and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like where MP offices don't cooperate with Google Teams, for example. So it's, as I've spoken to classes a number of times, I've had to call in via my cell phone as opposed to constituency offices.
Yeah, our security systems, we run into that several times as well. Yeah.
Looks like we
I
might
believe
have him here, Mr.
Bilodeau,
Chair.
are you there now? You're muted.
We should. Yes, I'm there. I don't know for how long because we tried to fix the IT guys tried to fix the problem since 1 hour and a half.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Bilodeau, I don't know if you have anything to say to start, or we can give you a few minutes to say a few words if you like. Look, on behalf of the committee, thank you for coming. Number one. And we can go to a series of questions, and if we have technical problems, we do. So the floor is yours if you want it.
You have to speak French, Wayne.
Oh, my French is good. Bonjour, Mr. Bilodeau.
Oh, what?
So, Mr. Bilodeau, you can speak in either language.
Okay. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Can you hear me? For an hour and a half, we've been trying to fix some sort of high-tech problem, and I'm really not the person who can do that. We had IT people here. Can you hear me now? That's the important thing. Yes. Great.
You want to make a statement, go ahead, and then we'll go to questions starting with Mr. Kelly. Did you want to make a statement, sir?
OK. Oui, on a déjà envoyé mes remarques.
My remarks were already sent ahead of time, but I can make some opening comments. Thank you for the invitation to participate in the work of your committee. I'm retired from KPMG, and do you hear me? Yes? I'm sorry. I'm told that my voice is not being heard, but thank you for the invitation to participate. I'm retired from KPMG, and I was an associate in the Montreal firm for over 25 years, from 1987 to 2014. I was never in charge of the tax department or any other department of KPMG. At the local, provincial, or national level, I was an associate, a client associate, and not a managing associate within the firm. I advise clients on Canadian and international tax matters. I've been involved in the design and implementation of foreign transactions, including financing structures, the so-called double dips, repatriation of foreign profits in foreign currency management. I've also advised on several mergers, acquisitions, and corporate reorganizations for both public and private companies. During my career, I had to discuss many times with the tax authorities, either in the context of obtaining advance rulings or during tax audits, and sometimes these discussions concerned foreign operations. My role was to meet the needs of the client by applying the tax legislation with the highest standards of integrity, compliance, and professionalism. Like most professionals in Quebec, as a CPA, I am bound by professional secrecy regarding our clients and former clients. I will answer your questions to the best of my knowledge, taking into account this confidentiality requirement. However, I can confirm beyond any doubt that I was never involved as an associate or otherwise in the so-called CINAR affair. I first became aware of this matter through the media. Unfortunately, it appears that there has been or that there was fraud in this case, and as a Canadian taxpayer and tax professional, I strongly encourage your committee to clarify this matter. Today, I am an occasional consultant for KPMG Montreal, and I sit on a few boards of directors. KPMG is a firm that, in my experience, always acts with integrity and in the best interest of Canadians.
In this regard, I would like to clarify a few points concerning the structure of the offshore society on Isle of Man, OCS. I did not participate in its development. I became aware of the structure of that society at the beginning of the 2000 as other partners in tax specialists. I analyzed the situation and felt that it was a valid structure on the tax and legal basis on condition that clients follow the advice of KPMG. Personally, I participated in the establishment of two of these structures, including one where a third-party firm was responsible for the establishment, and my role was very limited. I'd also like to point out that I was not involved as a partner or otherwise in the so-called sword companies or Parisia. I understand that interests you because these were businesses registered on Isle of Man, but none of them were involved in any of the files I worked on. I would not be able to provide you with any information on that topic. I cannot say anything other than what Madame Iacovelli said when she answered your questions. I will do my best to contribute to the discussion today.
Much, Mr. Bilodeau. We will go to, on the first round, will be Mr. Kelly, Mr. Zerowitz, Mr. St. Marie. We will go to you anyway. And Mr. Julian. Mr. Kelly.
All right. Well, thank you. So, you would support the testimony we already heard. You say that that KPMG had no involvement in the sword companies or the Sinar affairs. That your testimony.
J'ai précisé.
I said that personally I was not involved, and I referred you to the testimony of my former colleague who testified before your committee.
When you were an employee at the Montreal office, your office did offer offshore products to your clients? That was something that you did in the course of your work at KPMG in Montreal. I think you said you had two clients, or you were at least on two occasions involved in offering offshore products.
Did you get the translation, Mr. Bilodeau? Oh. Alexander, where are we at here? I believe we're froze.
Yeah, he just disappeared from the chat again.
Mr. Fragiskatis appeared in his block. Maybe he could answer.
Oh, is that what you want, Mr. Chair? Jeez, and I thought we were very good friends by now, but
I was. Well, Mr. Kelly, it was succeeded in asking the only question of this entire finance committee meeting.
There we go.
There we go. He's back.
All right.
I'm not sure. Did you get the translation, Mr. Bilodeau? Do you want to re-ask that, Pat, please?
He's speaking and he's muted.
You're muted, Mr. Bilodeau. No, he's froze again.
Okay. My question was just about whether offshore products were offered in the Montreal office when you worked there. I mean, you mentioned I think that you were involved in two of them. Was it a common?
I think he's froze, Pat. Okay. I just wonder, Clerk, if you can talk to the technicians on his end and maybe ask if they could just go to voice and see if that would work, because I know we've had to do it. Oh, here we go.
Can you hear me?
Bilodeau, did you hear Mr. Kelly's question? No, there he's froze again. Just see if they went to voice, if that would work. Because I know sometimes I've had to go to shut off my video and go to voice, and it worked.
Et si il se branche seulement avec...
But if he just uses sound, maybe he could go via telephone. That might be one possibility. Mr. Chair? It's me. I think that this isn't satisfactory for an appearance. I mean, more than half the meeting is gone. We don't have much time left. And in my opinion, this is not satisfactory relative to the criteria and requirements for the committee for his appearance.
Get any disagreement from me, but we have to work with what we have at the moment, Peter. That's the problem we're in, and I do believe when technicians are working on it both sides, I'm not going to suggest that there's anything other than technical problems.
May I make a suggestion? And
Go ahead,
I don't know what the appetite for. I know that this witness was summoned as a result of Mr. St. Marie's motion. It's his witness called, and but my rather than maybe the futility of repeating kind of over and over again what has not worked so far, unless the Minister of National Revenue does in fact wish to come for 2 full hours on Tuesday, perhaps we could have the minister for 1 hour on Tuesday and have this witness back in a better tested technological solution than today.
I don't have any. Is there any disagreement to that proposal if we can't get anywhere here where we take Mr. Bilodeau for an hour on Tuesday?
Yeah.
And see what they can work out in the meantime.
Completely agree, Mr. Chair. And I mean, if we do get a few minutes between now, we've got 45 minutes left in this meeting. If we get a few extra minutes, that's great. But I think the committee is clearly indicating he should come, that the subpoena would apply for Tuesday.
Yeah. Maybe since Minister Freeland is not available on Tuesday, maybe she's got 45 minutes now to give us.
I can. There.
Why don't you do that, Wayne? That's a good idea.
Hey, trust me, you won't get any answers out of her. I've tried.
Listen, I listened to question period today, Ed, and the answers you got, they were. Do you remember how you used to answer?
Yeah, they were the same answers that I got yesterday and on Tuesday and on Monday.
Well, look,
talking points.
Ed, when you got a good policy, you can't change your answers.
When you have a bad policy, that's when you hide.
Okay, guys, we're getting foolish here, and we're probably televised.
I've been drinking too much coffee, I think.
Anyway, we'll wait another few minutes here and see where we end up.
Mr. Chair, if we do end up delaying the witness's appearance just for the convenience of members of the committee, if the clerk could undertake to work with the witness in advance of the meeting to secure a stable connection, it would really help if we made sure we don't run into the exact same problem the next time around.
Yeah.
I think that's what I meant by with better tested technology.
I think by Mr. Bilodeau, they were already working on it for an hour and a half. But in any event, we got to find something.
Mr. Chair,
this is something that we haven't run into.
Mr. Chair, is Mr. Bilodeau appearing from a KPMG office?
I got no idea. Maybe yes, he is, according to the clerk.
Because I'm a little astounded with a multi-billion-dollar company that there is so many difficulties in actually getting a link.
Is there any chance, Mr. Chair, that we could actually have him appear in person here in Ottawa? We've got this whole room here. There are protocols, COVID protocols in place. we're allowed to sit here. It seems to me the distance we have available here in the room would allow him to safely provide his testimony.
We can certainly ask for that.
Oui, bonjour.
I know. Yes, there's Mr. Bilodeau now. Welcome. We're going to voice, I believe.
Yes, can you hear me?
Oui, je vous entends bien.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Translation, can you pick that up?
Yes, he can hear you fine. I can hear fine.
Right. Mr. Bilodeau can hear fine. Mr. Kelly, do you want to repeat your question for the third time?
All right.
And we'll go from there.
Okay. Just, I really wanted to know about maybe the scope. I'll go a little further with the question, and just to ask about the scope of overseas products offered in the Montreal office when the witness was there. I think he said in his opening statement on a couple of occasions he'd been involved in that. Can he comment on tax planning with involving overseas products a common or widely used strategy in the Montreal office when he worked there?
Mr. Bilodeau.
Bien sûr.
Of course, yes. But the product, the OSC type of planification was on a national basis. It wasn't just in Montreal. And what I was involved in, my participation in the two situations, of course, that work was done from my office in Montreal.
What changed? When did your business stop offering overseas products, and why?
Yes, the product planning was developed by a group of senior tax specialists under Barry Filtz, and it was developed across the country, and then it was explained at the local level in each province. Then we proceeded when the situation was one that lended itself to the client's needs, and if the client was in agreement, we went ahead.
Okay, I'm not sure that was an answer to my question. I want to know when. Was there a time period? Was there a date or a time period at which KPMG stopped offering overseas products? I think the earlier testimony suggested that there was a time at which KPMG ceased offering this kind of tax.
KPMG made a general review and stopped offering these products in 2002, 3, 4. The decision, and that's why I hesitated, the decision was made by the head office, not the local offices, for example, in Montreal. And it was a national level decision.
Okay. What was the rationale for that decision? Was there a change in the law?
No.
No.
No, they're not as a result of any change in law.
No.
Okay.
No.
Ça serait difficile pour moi de.
It'd be difficult for me to give you the reasons. I wasn't a member of the committee that took the decision to no longer recommend this kind of structure.
Okay. And were you involved, or did the Canada Revenue Agency, did you have any interaction with the agency over the the allegations around the CINAR fraud. I mean, I know that you've denied that that you were involved, but were there either from the CRA or any other investigative bodies? Did they question you or your company over these allegations?
As I said, I'm not familiar with the CINAR affair. I only learned about it in the media. I did have discussions with colleagues or ex-colleagues at the national level about whether or not they'd heard anything about CINAR. I can say quite honestly, I'm not familiar with CINAR or the people involved.
So in these conversations, your colleagues all denied to you or told you they'd never heard of this either, and nobody within.
Mes collègues se sont pas prononcés sur.
Well, my colleagues didn't really talk about what was happening internally or with the head office. They just when they were mentioning, if they mentioned CINAR, when KPMG was question about it, I imagine there was an investigation about who might have been directly or indirectly involved in it. And when I became in Quebec, I was asked about it, and I said I hadn't heard anything about it, and I was not involved in it, and I couldn't answer any questions about CINAR. I was in client service, and I was not at the level of management or the higher level management.
Okay, we will move on to Ms. Zerowitz, followed by Mr. St. Marie. Julie?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank Mr. Bilodeau for joining us. Thanks for enduring all your technical difficulties. So, Mr. Bilodeau, as you know, we're here to talk about how we can improve our efforts to combat tax avoidance and evasion. What practices are in place at KPMG to ensure that KPMG is not in any way helping clients to avoid or evade paying taxes in Canada?
With regards to tax planning, the firm has, well, I'm no longer an associate at the firm. I'm retired now. But at the time, we had what we called a risk management committee. So a professional working on a specific file does an analysis and then sends the analysis to a committee. The committee looks at planning on a more in-depth basis and looks at the risk level. And I'm talking about tax planning here.
So for every single client, you send every single client to a risk committee for an assessment in order to ensure, okay, so my question is...
No, there's some autonomy. There's a certain autonomy for the associates. As an example, you're not going to ask the risk committee to assess a contribution into an RRSP. But if we're looking at tax planning, there is an analysis that can be done to make sure that we are respecting the letter of the law. And then there's a last test to make sure, to see if the fiscal transaction is considered as being, as respecting the letter of the law. And there's a judgment call that has to be made. And when we're faced with this step, there is then an obligation to go before the Risk Management Committee and to determine if this, in fact, is an issue, and to make sure that it does respect the spirit of the Act. It is a judgment, and it's subject to interpretation. The courts have heard many different cases on this test, and we call this the anti-tax avoidance test, actually. So there are general anti-tax avoidance measures, and so this has to be taken into account, either to approve or refuse what's being proposed.
And Mr. Bilodeau, how does the approach at KPMG in ensuring that you have practices in place to ensure that you're not helping clients avoid or evade taxes, how does that line up with the best practices or best in class in Canada, or even around the world, actually? So how are you ensuring that you have the best in class practices in place to make sure that you're not in any way, as a company, helping companies to avoid paying taxes or to evade taxes?
D'une part, on va établir.
On one hand, one thing has to be made clear. The issue of operations and what could be considered tax evasion, KPMG does not participate in this. Tax evasion is, in the end, to deliberately ignore the law. So you're ignoring this test of the law. Tax evasion is not what KPMG does. Now, if we're not talking about tax evasion, but we're talking about tax avoidance is something else. Is the fact of reducing the amount of tax paid, does this follow the letter of the law? And also, on a second test, does it respect the spirit of the law? The professionals have to determine, on one hand, if tax planning being proposed or analyzed, the analysis follows the letter of the law. That's the first test. The professionals, the associates, have this expertise and they do this analysis. The second condition is the spirit of the law being respected. Automatically, at that step, the analysis has to be made, but has to be sent to the Risk Management Committee. The committee will either support or not. If they do not approve, then the company cannot put this in place. If they approve it, if they approve the operation, the company can then continue discussion with the client on the planning that's being analyzed.
Sorry, Julie, I'll have to go on to Mr. St. Marie.
Thank you so
Gabriel?
much.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Bilodeau. From my point of view, creating a shell society in the Isle of Man where a Canadian client puts the fortune and then no taxes being paid, this is immoral. And for me, I want to live in a society where these types of schemes are illegal. And so that is why we're studying the situation before the committee. I would like to remind you that all the testimony before the committee are protected by immunity. That means that you have nothing to fear with regards to incrimination of yourself or someone else if something was revealed. This is what the law clerk reminded us. And so what we're trying to do is to get at the heart of the matter. And this is what allows for this immunity. To your knowledge, is there a link between KPMG and the sword companies Chasqua, Qatar, Six, and Spatha? My ex-colleagues have already answered the question. Well, you'll understand that I cannot testify on things that I do not know, and I cannot make a hypothesis. What I mentioned in my opening statement is that I have no knowledge of these companies. I do not know who is involved in this. I know the question was addressed to the company, and my ex-colleague responsible for tax planning in Canada has already answered. Well, she didn't answer, and we've just passed a motion so that she will have to answer. So I would like to confirm that what you've just said is that, to your knowledge, there is no link between Chasqua, Qatar, Six, and Spatha and KPMG. I understood this correctly? Answer. I have no knowledge of this, and the company said that there was no link with these companies. I strongly encourage your committee to investigate the matter. If there has been fraud, that is not correct, and you will have to pursue this. KPMG will have to answer, and they have always done that. And KPMG will answer your question. Thank you for this intention, but I find it quite curious. It's curious that you say, I'm just asking you to confirm if, from your point of view, there is no link between these sword companies and KPMG. And in your answer, you are going around the issue. It's as if there is an appearance. It's almost as if there's something that you do not want to disclose, and I find that concerning. Answer. Mr. Sainte-Marie, perhaps I was not clear enough. There are two answers to your question. There is my personal answer, my personal involvement as an associate, and even a non-associate of the cabinet, of the company. I said that I didn't know and I had no involvement with these companies. Now, the second part of the answer has to do with KPMG. KPMG, my colleague, during her testimony, mentioned that research was done in all of the company and that there was no link. There was no link with these companies. Thank you, but I would like to specify that in the answer it said we looked over the past 10 years, but the creation of these companies it was well before. And so I didn't want for you to answer on behalf of KPMG, but on behalf of yourself. So I understand that you... Okay, so I also understand that you don't know of anyone who would have had a link or would have contributed, who have worked directly or indirectly with these sword companies, Chasqua, Qatar, Six, and Spatha. Is that correct? Answer, yes. Okay, thank you. And the Weinberg, Northshield, and Montreal scandal. Can you tell me if, to your knowledge, KPMG had no direct or indirect link with the amounts that were managed and taken by Weinstein, Northshield, and Montreal? I'm going to repeat the same answer. There's two parts to your question. There's a personal part, and I believe I was clear. I, myself, had no involvement, have no knowledge of this file. You're actually informing me today about this. Now, with regards to all of KPMG Canada, my colleague has answered, and she mentioned that there was no link. So I can simply confirm. Mr. Sainte-Marie, I can only confirm what I've read. I cannot confirm things that I have no awareness of. I just wanted to know if you personally had this knowledge. Thank you Thank you for your answers. Parisha, do you have a knowledge of Parisha? Did you have any direct or indirect link? Or do you know if KPMG had a link with Parisha? Same answer. Same answer as with the previous question. I have trouble even pronouncing this, Parisha. The first time I saw this in the media, I wasn't sure what it was, and I have no knowledge of this. And with regards to KPMG, my colleague covered this subject. And I have confidence. Thank you.
Thank you. If you trouble pronouncing, just imagine me, Mr. Bildo, Mr. Julian, and you'll be followed by Ms. Jansen. Mr. Julian, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bilodeau, for appearing before us today. And given our technical issues, and we have so many questions to ask, I'm sure that we will call you before the committee once again. My first question, what was the highest position that you had at KPMG? An associate. There are two categories of associate, but during my period, there was an associate level, so we talk about, yeah, but you weren't senior VP? Yes, but that's when I left in 2014. I had a relationship with KPMG, and I reduced my activities with KPMG. In 2014, I was 58, 59 years old, so I decided to not be an associate anymore, and I continued working as a consultant, and I had a title as Senior VP of the Tax Department. That's a very impressive title. So in this case, so you're saying that as Senior VP of the Tax Department, you were not part of this risk management committee? Correct. So who was part of this committee? What job position? Well, risk management, the colleagues that participate are generally experienced colleagues that come from most Canadian provinces, so large firms in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary offices usually. Yes, but you would know who was part of the committee. Right. So who was on this risk management committee? Well, that committee, well, there was a rotation. I understand, but I'm asking you the question. I am asking for names, because if I follow your testimony, you're saying that all these questions as to if it was accepted or not, if it was complying with the law or not, it was determined by the Risk Management Committee. So who was part of this committee? If you have names or job positions, that would be acceptable. Can you provide names this week or next week? Well, it would be preferable to address the question. Well, you'll understand that during my participation at KPMG, many people transited through the committee. Yes, I agree. It would be important for us to know. Do you have a specific period that you're referring to? The period that is being discussed during the creation of these overseas products. Between 2000 and 2014, so during this period, decisions were made in order to create these products, these overseas products, and it would be important to have this. I will give you the time to answer in the following days. Here's my next question. Wait, I want to make sure that I understood your question, Mr. Julian. So what you want to know more specifically are who were the members of the Risk Management Committee that analyzed the structure and the different requests for, yes, that examined these issues to see if this complied to tax law. You spoke about two files. of overseas products that you created. When did you create these? And do these products still exist? And my last question, who approved these products that you proposed? I think this is linked to your first question. So who are the members of the Risk Management Committee? So what would be even easier, because I'm at KPMG very temporarily, would be to ask the question of KPMG. I don't see any problem in asking the question to KPMG. Thank you, but we've asked the questions, and we've asked many questions, and up until now, we've received very few answers from KPMG. According to you, how many of these companies, because I know that you're talking about two different files, how many of these companies existed and were created and that you are aware of when we talk about the creation of these tax products overseas? I was involved of overseas tax products in two different operations. I cannot answer for all of the associates throughout Canada. So you were not aware of any other overseas products? No. Okay. Now I'm going to switch to English.
Before you, after Ms. Echiovelli appeared before this committee on May 6th, did you meet with her or speak with her? And did you receive any instructions from KPMG or KPMG's lawyers and legal advice prior to your appearance before this committee?
J'ai pas parlé avec Madame Iacovelli.
I didn't speak with Mrs. Iacovelli. You can understand that I was called to appear 36 hours ago, so I had a very short period of time. So yes, I did communicate with KPMG. I'm here to testify about my period when I was an associate at KPMG. And so today, I'm here to testify, and I am in the office of KPMG. So I thought that I would avoid technical issues, but technical issues exist at the KPMG office too.
Peter, this will be your last question.
Thank you. Do you know Sandra, or have you ever met or spoken with Sandra Georgeson, Enzo Beretta, and Cooper Woods?
Non. Je ne connais pas. J'ai entendu le nom de, je pense.
No, I believe I've heard the name of Sarah through one of your colleagues that mentioned that she had been called to testify, but I have not heard the other names. None of the three? No.
Okay, then we'll move on to Ms. Jansen. I don't have anybody on the Liberal side after that, so if anybody else wants to come in, just put up your hand and we'll go there. We'll go to a fast-moving couple of rounds with people with specific questions, because we do have a hard stop due to Parliament at 5:30 your time. So, Ms. Jansen, so people put their hands up on the list, and I'll go to them for as quick a rounds as we can, so we get those who really want in. Ms. Jansen, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Yes, Mr. Bilodeau, I'm wondering, you described a system that you called a risk management committee, which is a way in which KPMG ensures that their people are acting ethically and remain in compliance with the law. Is that correct?
Exactement.
Yes. Yes, it's a risk management, what we call the general measure. There's a major issue of interpretation when we have to decide if a planning operation respects the spirit of the law. And I said that there are a number of cases who've been before the courts, and we need experienced people to decide whether or not the planning is acceptable.
Now, does KPMG USA have the same system of anti-tax avoidance through a risk management committee?
I have no idea. I can't answer that question.
Where would KPMG Canada have come up with the system of risk management that you described?
Well, it was the people involved in the management and in tax practice based on the changes in legislation over the years, and we decided it would be a good idea to create this community. It's been in existence since 1987, and so that was when the KPMG decided to start this committee.
Wouldn't it make sense that the American KPMG would have the same system? I mean, I would imagine that it's just as concerning to follow the law in the U.S. as it is here in Canada. It seems odd to me that you have no idea how KPMG does their risk management in the U.S.
C'est une préoccupation dans tous les pays.
But this is a concern in all countries.
So I'm just curious, because obviously whatever risk management system they have in place didn't seem to have worked in this case. But I'm just wondering, you mentioned that you're retired, but for some reason you decided to go into the KPMG office today to be a witness. And I'm just wondering, why did you decide to go to their office since you're retired and haven't been working there for many years, as I understand it?
Non, je pense que.
I think that, and as I said in my opening remarks, I have stayed in contact with the KPMG. I'm a temporary consultant, so I still have links to KPMG without being a permanent staff member. And I'm in the office from time to time. I still have good relations with the KPMG. I worked for them for more than 25 years.
I'm just wondering then, I understand you have legal counsel with you there right now. Are you paying for that yourself personally, or is that a KPMG expense?
Yes, I am.
Personally?
Ça va être une dépense.
Well, it will be a cost paid by KPMG. And it's because of my links to KPMG that I'm here.
Okay. I'm just wondering, it is a bit concerning to hear that KPMG US and KPMG Canada wouldn't have the same sort of systems in place for risk management. And so my concern is just that if it didn't work in the U.S., I'm wondering if it's possible that the system that you have in place also didn't work. I wonder if you could speak to that, because it is concerning as taxpayers, as a business owner myself. I always want to make sure that we do the right thing, and we've always trusted our accountants to give us good information because we don't know the tax law very well. So how can we be sure as businesses that we're not being given poor advice on these sorts of tax schemes?
I explained the risk management and tax management systems, and I also said in my opening remarks that the Isle of Man product was analyzed by senior partners, and I've been asked what the names were. And the documents that have been provided to you provide descriptions of the creation of the Isle of Man companies, and also provide the analysis that was undertaken more than 20 years ago.
just curious.
Last question, Ms. Jansen.
Okay, so again, I'm just curious. I didn't really get an answer which could make, I think, Canadian businesses feel secure that the tax advice that they're getting is correct, especially seeing that, KPMG US clearly failed in their duty to ensure they were doing things legally. And it doesn't sound like KPMG US and KPMG Canada are sharing that the same sort of committee, risk management committee. How can we be sure that we're getting good advice?
You'd have to ask the right person. I was a partner in Quebec. I worked for the Canadian branch of KPMG. I don't know what the procedures and risk management structure in the United States is. That's up to KPMG US. Like all major firms, KPMG has a risk management structure. And I can only explain what was happening in Canada. I can't say what happens in the United States.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll go to Annie Koutrakis and then followed by Ed Fast. And we may have to stop at 5:30. But as I said earlier, anybody who's got a specific, fairly quick question they want to ask, just put up your hand in the chat thing there, or whatever it is. Go ahead, Ms. Koutrakis.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you as well, Mr. Bilodeau. Can you explain to us how the Canadian tax system and more generally international tax systems have changed since the OCS structures were created? And more specifically, what legislation or regulation has been created to combat this type of tax avoidance structure?
Over
the years, there's been a significant change on the tax level and also other aspects. Who would have thought that these days we'd be wearing masks all the time? So it's the same thing for the tax system. There's been an evolution of the law, the jurisprudence, drops in taxes as well. And these have contributed greatly to changes in behavior, changes in culture, and even the interpretation of what tax morality is. In the past, that didn't really exist. So we just applied the legal tax as written, but now we're more concerned about tax morality. And this isn't just something for Canada. It's in all the industrialized countries. What contributed to that is is a lot of the work that's done by the OECD. For example, what's called unfair tax competition that was published in the major industrialized countries and the measures that were adopted. And now there's an obligation to report the entire profile of an organization. There's a reason. I mean, you have to identify the country, and there are different countries with different tax systems, and there are obligations to be more forthcoming. I don't know if I answered your question, but yes, well, it's an evolution of society as well. What's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So, in my opinion, and I think the members of the committee as well, this is a positive thing. My last question: what are the strategies now used by KPMG to plan taxes, and how have these strategies evolved over the last 20 years? KPMG has evolved just like the situation. in general. As I said earlier, 20 years ago, we didn't talk about tax morality, fiscal morality. We do now. And this is in response to the law, and we now go even farther than the law. And there are also court decisions in this sense as well, and we have to adapt to the law and the adjustments in particular cases. Thank you very much. That's all for now, Chair.
Thank you, Annie. We'll now turn to Mr. Fast in the West Block there. Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bilodeau, for coming to our meeting. You may feel like you're in an inquisition, but in fact, this study is much broader than CINAR or the Sword Companies or the Paradise Papers or KPMG. We're trying to get to the bottom of how tax evasion can be eliminated. Now, my guess is we're not going to get to the bottom of it, but we're trying to make some progress. And I'm glad you mentioned the OECD, because the OECD did come out with a very interesting report entitled Ending the Shell Game, Cracking Down on Professionals Who Enable Tax and White-Collar Crimes. Now, I'd be surprised if we were able to get any accounting firm across Canada to come to committee and admit that they've been engaged in tax evasion. They may even deny that they've been involved in tax avoidance. But as you've suggested, tax avoidance is different than evasion and is a matter of degrees. And there is aggressive tax avoidance, and there is just simple tax avoidance.
Il y a une énorme différence entre les deux.
There's a big difference between those two, and I would refer you to the Revenue Canada site, which explains very carefully what's the difference between avoidance and evasion. Evasion is deliberately ignoring the law. And if you ignore the law...
I did want to ask you a specific question, and that is... That OECD report specifically highlighted 4 things that could be done to address the issue of what they refer to as professional enablers. And they're talking about accountants. Let's be very frank about that. The first was engaging in more communication. Second was leveraging the role of supervisory bodies and industry sectors. Third was early disclosure, and then whistleblowing, and then a strong approach to enforcement. I want to ask you a question about the second part, and that is supervisory bodies, which are your professional societies, which are governed provincially. Are you aware of anyone within KPMG, any accountant within KPMG, having been disciplined or cited or censured as a result of the Isle of Man offshore structures?
No,
No, I have no information in that regard.
I'd like you to comment on what it is that your profession could do to help reduce or eliminate tax evasion. I know it's a tough question, but surely you as a lifelong accountant have been able to identify certain strategies that could help our country address this issue that costs taxpayers billions and billions and billions of dollars every year.
Réfléchis à la question.
I'm thinking, and I know that there are the tax authorities, national and international, and there are authorities. There are many measures for fiscal compliance, and there are also prohibitive and punitive measures, and I think we're on the right path.
Your professional body across Canada in the provinces, do those professional bodies actually have sanctions they can impose on accountants that engage in tax evasion?
Je ne saurais répondre à cette question.
I can't answer that question. I have no idea. I assume that they do because that's why you have professional organizations.
Last question, Ed.
You're a member of an accounting professional body, correct? Because you could not practice otherwise, correct?
Yes.
All right. Where is that? In Quebec, correct?
Oui, exact.
Yes. I'm a member of the Order of Accountants of Quebec.
Me that you don't know exactly what rules they have about you or any other accountant within that body engaging in tax evasion?
There are. I would answer by saying that there are rules that exist on the one hand to ensure that the members have appropriate training and provide the best service to our clients. Any rules regarding sanctions, I'm not familiar with them, but the Order of Accountants does publish names of people who have been sanctioned by the association.
Both Mr. St. Marie will give you about 2 minutes, and Mr. Julian about 2, and then we're going to stop. Our hard stop. Mr. St. Marie.
Oui, merci. Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So, Mr. Bilodeau, in your testimony, you said that you created strategies to provide legal tax avoidance, just as KPMG did. But my problem is that when I think about the beneficiaries and people at home, and we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and people who are paying high taxes, nurses, for example, and then I see these multimillionaires, billionaires who use these strategies to pay ridiculously small amounts of taxes, whereas they have the means to pay these taxes to declare their revenues. And these rich people, thanks to strategies that you have created, allow them to pay just very little. And even though it's legal, do you think it's moral? Our role as professionals is limited to interpreting and applying the law. If there's a lack of equity between different categories of taxpayers, as you mentioned, I think it's legislators to do that. I have to interrupt you, but you don't. This is the same problem that was raised by representatives of Revenue Canada. There are lots of interpretations, and there are lots of people like you who use these different interpretations to do things that are immoral and unacceptable. And I think that the fact that you don't recognize that it's immoral, I think it's regrettable. Thank you. I've finished.
A minute to respond, 30 seconds to respond, Mr. Bilodeau.
I didn't understand.
I didn't really understand the question. I'm sorry.
But in fact, Mr. Julien.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to ask you a question, Mr. Bilodeau. For example, Janet Watson, who lost her life savings because of these types of strategies. But I'm just going to talked about Parisia. And I was troubled by Ms. Iacovellia. Parisia is linked to the sword companies and was registered after a fax was sent from KPMG in Montreal. And so my first question is, were you aware that Parisia, of the existence of Parisia? Was there discussion of Parisia in the office in Montreal, or was it discussed by the Risk Management Committee? And my second question, and Mr. Iacovelli said clearly that that those companies were not operating after 2003, but we've found that Parisia continued until 24 March 2021. This is just after the revelations following the program on Fifth Estate on TV. Were you aware that Parisia has continued to exist until that date? And how can you explain that Parisia has continued to exist during this period, even if Ms. Iacovelli said that it was not used after 2003?
I'll refer to my previous statement. I have no knowledge of this company. So I will answer this question by saying, no, I'm not aware of this. I have received no information, no contact with people who participated.
Last quick questions, Mr. Julian. Very quick.
Well, I have many, many questions, Mr. Chair. But the last question for today. You talked about Barry Phillips, a tax expert. Mr. Bilodeau, is Barry Phillips the person, the contact person, who could tell us more about issues linked to KPMG tax schemes? Barry Phillips? In the document, his name appears in the document that KPMG remitted. This person was involved in the setting up of this strategy. Now, as to know if he should appear or not, I believe this is up to you to decide.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bilodeau. We will have to adjourn there. We will thank you very much for coming today. I'm sorry about all the technical difficulties. We will go forward on the basis of what the committee decides going forward. Thank you.
On sait pas c'est la faute de qui, l'aspect technique.
We don't know whose fault this is, all these technical issues, but I apologize. And I apologize for all the inconvenience.
The technical issues were not your fault. So on behalf of the committee, thank you for coming. For the steering committee, we did pass a motion or two here. Does people, do we still need the steering committee, yes or no? Any yeses or any noes? We do, okay. So we will have to take at least 15 minutes. Let's say 40, 50. We will start the steering committee at 5:55 Ottawa time. And we only have a half an hour due to Zoom problems, et cetera, but we will adjourn this meeting, meeting adjourned, and start the steering committee at 5:55. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.